So we're going to have another look at a pre-release task, and I'm going to code this. I want you to code it along with me. But let's look at this task first. It says, write and test a program in 3 tasks. A school keeps records of weights of each pupil. The weight in kilograms of each pupil is recorded on the first day of term. Input and store the weights and names recorded for a class of 30 pupils. You must store the weights in a one-dimensional array and the names in another one-dimensional array. All the weights must be validated on entry and any invalid weights rejected. You must decide on your own validation rules. You may assume that pupils' names are unique. Output the names and weights of pupils in each class. Then task 2, the weight in kilograms of each pupil is recorded again. On the last day of term, calculate and store the difference in weight for each pupil. And then finally task 3, for those pupils who have a difference in weight of more than 2.5 kilograms, output with a suitable message the pupil's name, the difference in weight, and whether this is a rise or a fall. So if we think about task 1 first, we don't have to worry about task 2, task 3 at this stage. The way to approach this, if you can remember when we looked at various different things in lessons, was to try and break down this problem. So we're going to try and figure out what the main algorithm for this is and break the problem down into smaller subtasks. So let's do that first. So if we think about what this task is asking to do, we need to go through the description of the task and think about what it's actually asking. So here it says the weight in kilograms, so we know that all our weights are going to be in kilograms, so I'm just going to underline that there, of each pupil is recorded on the first day of term. So we know we're going to record something, we know we're going to input something. So we've identified that we're going to have to input data. So I'm just going to write that up there. And the second one, it says, as we read along, it says input and store the weights and names recorded for a class of 30 pupils. So actually there it does say input, and we're obviously going to store it because otherwise you know what's the point in entering it. So we're storing the weights and the names of 30 pupils. So there's 30 pupils. So we're definitely going to have some kind of loop because we're going to have to do this 30 times. You must store the weights in a one-dimensional array. So that's helpful. A 1D array. And what else does it say? And the names in another array. So we're going to have 2 arrays. We're going to have a names array as well. So 2 arrays. And we're going to use that. Excuse me, I'll show you later on how we're going to do that. And we're going to need, it says you must decide on your own validation rules because the weights are validated on entry and anything invalid is rejected. So we're going to validate the weights and reject invalid ones. And then output the names and the weights of the pupils in the class. So output. So we could think about a flowchart for this. Let's think about how we would do a flowchart. So I'm just going to create a new window. So if we think about a flowchart for this, we know we're starting and we're going to input 30 times. But if we're inputting something, we need to have some kind of counter. So I'm going to set a counter to be equal to 0. Then we're going to input a weight and store it. We're going to input the weight. Now we need to validate the weight. So we could say, decision here, is it a valid weight? We don't have to worry about what the validation are rules in order to get our flowchart working. If it's a valid weight, then we can reject it. Probably output a message maybe and say output rejected. And then loop around to get another weight. Sorry, my lines are not very straight there, are they? If the weight's okay, then we're going to store it. So if it's a valid weight, no. If it's a valid weight, yes. Then we could check our counter. Actually, let me just pause that for a moment. There we go. So if it is a valid weight, then we need to do two things. We need to increase our counter by 1, and we also need to store it, which is fine. So we could do that first. So let's do that. We increase our counter by 1. Counter equals counter plus 1. And then we also need to store our our weight in the array. So we could have a weights array, and that is going to have the new weight on it. That's not very well drawn, is it? Look. Weights array, and we append the weight on that we've entered, like that. So that's the main kind of crux of that part. So then we need to check to see if our counter is 30. So we could do that up here. Is our counter 30? If it is, then we can end. And if it isn't, then we need to input another weight, like that. Now I haven't put that we need to input the name. We could actually just input the weight and the name, could just add the name on there and also add the name on at the bottom here. So everything's sort of complete, because we don't want to add the name either until we know that it's a valid weight. We don't want to do anything unless it's an invalid weight. Okay, so good. So that's the main algorithm there. Let's have a look at trying to code this now. Okay, so let's start coding this. We know from that flowchart that we need to have 2 arrays, so we might as well just create those arrays first. We have a weights array, and we also are going to have a names array for our class. And we know we're going to have a loop. Now, because we know that we're going to loop 30 times, we could use a for loop. However, because we're validating the entries, I'm probably going to say, actually, I'm going to use a while loop, because we only want to increase our counter if it's a valid weight. So I'm going to create a while loop and set a Boolean variable to control my while loop, and also have a counter. But my loop's only going to run while it's running. Actually, no, thinking about this, well, you could just use the counter, while counter. Yeah, actually that's what I'm going to do. So this is, I'm not going to do that. Just ignore that. I'm going to have a counter equal to 0, and while my counter, is less than or equal to 30, then we're going to loop. Okay. So that actually gets rid of that. You could have a Boolean there to control your loop, but you know, this is the thing, is there's many ways to do this. You can decide how to do it yourself. So we know that we need to get the input. So if you remember our flowchart, we had input. So we know we're going to have to store a weight, and we're going to have to input that. Now, a weight, I guess, would probably have a decimal place. It's in kilograms, so it could be, 50.5 kilograms. So I'm going to assume that it's going to be a float. Enter the pupil weight. And then also enter the name. That's not cast to anything at all. Now you could, I guess, probably, you might want to enter the name first. Actually, I think realistically that's probably a better idea. So I'm just going to swap those two lines around and assume that we're going to enter someone's name first. Now we need to validate the weight. So the task was to validate the weight. So we have to think up our own rules. What would a minimum weight be? Well, it needs to be greater than 0, I guess. So I'm going to create a couple of variables here, one called min weight, and I guess, what could we have for that? We could have, I guess, a kilogram. Well, we don't know how old the pupils are. So I'm going to say the minimum weight's 0, because you could have very young children, although I guess there'd be more than a kilogram. So actually, I'm going to say 1 kilogram. That's probably going to be a bit low. And then the maximum kilograms, I'm going to say 500. So it's quite a broad range there. You might think differently if you feel different, you know, that I've gone too low or too high. Maybe you could, you can change that if you want to. That's fine. So now we're going to check our weight. So we're going to say if the weight that the user has entered is less than the minimum weight, or the weight is greater than the maximum weight. So basically what this is saying is if the weight that the user has entered is smaller than 1 or bigger than 500, then we're going to print a message to say rejected weight. Please try again. Okay. However, if the weight's okay, then we're going to add it to the arrays. So we can add the weight to the array and add the name to the array as well. So we can say names.append name weights.append weight. Okay. We also need to increase our counter. Counter equals counter plus 1. And that's it, I think. I can't think of anything else. Let's run that then. And actually, before I run this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to print out the arrays as well so that we can see whether or not they're being added. So I am going to just print out weights or names and print out the weights as well. And then that will help debug any code. And what I'm actually also going to do, I'm just going to add some brackets around these. You don't have to do this, but I like to do it just to make it look a bit better. Okay, so let's run this and see if there's any errors. And let's just check this, enter the name. So I'm just going to add a couple of normal values. That looks good, it's added me. And I'll add a, good. So I've added 55.6, which is a float. It's got a decimal place, so that looks good. And then let's try another one. Bob is going to be -2. Rejected weight, please try again. Good, so that worked. Let's try Simon again, Bob again, and we'll add him, and this time we'll put him really heavy, 550. So if you remember, our maximum weight was 500, so we're testing that. Good, rejected weight, please try again. So that's all working correctly for task 1. We need to just print everything. Well, we are printing everything out. We could probably print that all out a bit nicer. So, because actually, obviously, it's just printing everything out. Yeah, it's not very nice. So what I'll do is once the while loop finishes, I'm going to print everything out nicely. I'm going to use a for loop for that because it looks nice. And so I'll do for index in range 0 to the length of, I'll do it from the weights array, doesn't matter, we could do it from the names array or the weights array, but I'm going to do it from weights. And I'm just going to print out the name, names, index, and then a little bit of a space like that. And then actually I could do a tab, so I'll do a \t, that will tab it. and then the weights index, and that should print it out quite nicely. I might just put a header there. I could put a header. No, I'll leave it like that. We'll leave it like that. Now, before I finally test this again, I need to test this for loop here. I obviously don't want to be sat there typing in 30 different names and weights. So what I'm going to do is, for testing purposes only, just change this so that it's maybe 4 people. And it's fine to do that when you're programming, you're testing, so that you obviously don't waste too much time testing stuff. Not that testing isn't important, but obviously at this stage we just need to make sure it's working. So let's add some data in, and I will just adjust my screen so that you can see what I'm typing in. There we go. So enter pupil weight. I'm just going to make all of this up. And there we are. Good. So that's worked okay. Good. Excellent. So that's task 1 all done.